Hey everybody, this is Professor Champy coming to you once again via video form. I hope that your quarantine is going well. I hope that you had a good holiday recently, if there was one that you celebrate. And I wanted to come to you today to do more of a mailbag type episode. I want to answer some of your questions that you submitted for our last journal. I want to give you some advice about our poetry essay. If you're watching this on April 13th, when I'm going to be posting it, you still have a couple of days to work on the poetry essay. If you saw my email, I pushed the due date back to Wednesday. I wanted to give you some time to watch this video to get some of your questions answered, and just with what we're dealing with, just a little extra time to put the last touches on that essay. So I'm going to go through some of the questions that people submitted, and hopefully that will be helpful. So I'm going to leave these anonymous, but these are the actual questions that I received, and I kind of just want to go through them one by one. So let's turn now to the first question. It says here, one of the difficulties that I was experiencing was formulating an argument regarding the poem rather than just explaining its meaning and message. I'm also having difficulty with writing the essay as I'm having trouble squeezing probable interpretations on the poem, since the poem I chose was its nation time. And I feel like I am limited to just talking about how the poem suggests sparking a violent revolution, and the poem is more aggressive compared to other poems. So I want to address the first part of this question. It's a really good question. It's something that I've definitely been leaving on as comments on a number of drafts, and something that I wanted to talk about in this video anyway. The idea of making an argument versus explaining what the poem means. I know that it seems like similar, right? To me, explaining what the poem means is kind of going through and being like, in the first line of the poem says this, here's what they mean by that. The second line of the poem says this, here's what they mean by that. And kind of just going through the poem and just saying, like, here's what it means. I don't think that is really the same as making an argument the way that we've been doing in our literary analysis essays. Really, I think the biggest difference is having an arguable thesis. If I said on your draft that I feel like you're just explaining what it means more than giving an argument, it's about the thesis. You've got to still have that one very clear argument that's driving everything that you're saying about the poem. So there might be parts of the poem that don't fit into your argument, right? If you're making your argument the way that we've been talking about it, there could easily be parts of the poem that you don't mention at all because they just don't fit in with your argument. And yeah, they still have meaning, and maybe we could explain what that part of the poem means, but if it's not pertinent to your argument, then it's not really relevant for this essay. So if I was saying that I feel like you're just explaining what it means, it's kind of that I feel like you're just going more line by line and giving us like a translation or an interpretation rather than making an argument. So that would be the biggest thing for me. And, like all the essays, like the last essay, like, the next essay we're going to be writing, having that arguable, debatable, clear thesis is the number one thing that you need to do. So just make sure that you've got that main idea going, and I don't think it'll feel like you're just giving me kind of a synopsis or a summary of what the poem's about. I know that the way that we've talked about the thesis is the message that the poem is trying to send, or what the poem's trying to say. So I can understand why our initial reaction might be to go through line by line and be like, well, in this line, they're trying to say this. In this line, they're trying to say that. But that's not really the same thing as the message that they're trying to send or what they're trying to show us about a certain topic, right? I think that's the difference, is having the topic and then making the argument about that. So, to give an example, like I said, if you're explaining what it means, so this part means this part means this. If you're making an argument, it would be more like, just to give an example, I'm not saying that this is what you should use or need to use or even, anything like that. But just to give an example, you could look at, it's nation time and say, more of a thesis would be, it's nation time shows us the politics of the black nationalist movement or something like that, right? And then you could connect it to Malcolm X. And even Martin Luther King, and show how it's different from Martin Luther King, but similar to Malcolm X, if that's what you think. You could even, include other thinkers from the period if you wanted to. I would definitely check out the essay that I posted last time, the Black Arts Movement. That is a source that I think everyone can use in their essay. I think that source will apply to any essay that you're going to be writing. So I would definitely read that. It's a little bit long, but even just the first 10 pages or so, I think will give you a lot of good stuff to go on. And I think that kind of brings us to the next part of this question, which was about expanding our analysis, having enough to write, expanding on our ideas. So the person said in this question that they feel like all they have to say about its nation time is that it's looking for more of a violent revolution, that it's more aggressive than the other poems. I definitely agree with that. And I think there is a way to take those ideas and, kind of stretch them out and explain them and give evidence in a way that can give us more of a full paper. So the first thing I would say, if we're looking at its nation time and we're saying, okay, this is a more violent approach to the civil rights movement, or a more aggressive approach, direct approach, whatever we want to say, I would then try to connect that to the politics of the time period. I think this is kind of the first essay question that I had, where I was asking, what do these poems think about revolution? What are the theories of revolution that these poems are putting out there? So in order to do that, you would want to look at whatever you think the poem is saying and see how it fits into the politics of the time period. The easiest way to do this is going to be to look at Letter from Birmingham Jail by Martin Luther King and Message to the Grassroots by Malcolm X. Read those if you haven't done so already. Those are also really helpful sources for this essay. So one thing I would suggest is trying to place whatever poem you're looking at within the context of the politics of the time period. Is it more on the Christian peaceful protest side? Is it more on the black nationalist, any means necessary kind of side? What are the arguments there? How is it similar to what Malcolm X is saying? How is it different from what he was saying? How is the poem critical of what Martin Luther King was saying? All of those would be a way to really expand this, to get some sources in there, and to make the argument, to kind of back up why you're correct about this, to put the poem and the argument that it's making into the context of the time period so that we can understand it better. Also, on this point of trying to expand our ideas, you can give as many pieces of evidence as you can find from the poem. Close reading, right? I commented on your short story essays about some of this. Check out those comments, by the way, if you haven't done so yet. So you can take quotes, right? As many quotes as you need from the poem, they're all evidence, and really break it down like word by word. Really look at the word choice, especially with poetry. This is something that we were talking about a lot. What a big decision it is, when you're writing a poem that only has 40 words, 35, 50 words, whatever, each word becomes super important. So you can get down to that granular level of why did they choose this word and not that word? What's the effect on the reader that they chose this word and not some other word? I think that will really help us to dig deeper and expand our analysis. And then there's the form. The other big thing, besides the word choice, the way that they structured the poem. How does it look on the page? Is it conventional? Does it fit more in with like European models of for instance, the Edgar Allan Poe poem, where there's a lot of rhyming. There's a very clear rhythm, that iambic pentameter that I wrote a little bit about, the ba-bump, 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 that kind of very classical structure, or is it something totally different? That's another way to think about it. And if the form is totally different, what does that mean for the message? If the form is maybe revolutionary, if we want to say, if it's breaking the conventions that poetry normally had, and we know all about these conventions that poetry had for a very long time in terms of rhyming and everything like that, if it's breaking those rules, how does that fit into the message? How can a revolutionary form connect to a revolutionary message? So word choice and form are the two things that I would focus on in terms of deepening our analysis, expanding our ideas. Let's keep it moving here. I want to move now to the second question. This question reads, something I found difficult is sometimes understanding what the poem is about. For an example, regarding the poem Bells, is that it mentions bells often, but it typically has an underlining meaning to the whole passage itself of the poem. So I usually must go over and reread the poems a couple times to get the full details of the passage and understand what the metaphor sometimes is or refers to. Though the videos you posted on Canvas for the other poems help that situation. Well, that's good. I'm glad. A question I have is, what do you believe helps you most when you analyze a poem? A couple of things here. First of all, as it relates to The Bells by Edgar Allan Poe, that poem is not one that I want you to write about for this essay. I was using that poem as just an example to try to help us get into the mindset of thinking about poetry, to help us think about rhyming and rhythm and how those things are important. So that poem is not really for this essay. I want you to focus on the rest of the poems from the civil rights movement for this essay. Harlem, Kitchenette Building, now I'm gonna forget the name of them all. Harlem, Kitchenette Building, Citizen, It's Nation Time, Mississippi Goddamn. Those are your options here. So you want to choose at least one of those poems. Could be more than one, maybe two, maybe three. All five would be tough. Oh, we also had We Shall Overcome, which we didn't really look at the poem, but we watched the video, so you could use that if you want as well. It's from the movement. So I would focus on those poems for this essay first one. I want to pick at least one of those, could be more. But in general, I see what you're saying about the bells. I don't really know what the message of that one is either, totally. I think that poem is more about the rhyming and the rhythm and the structure, or maybe trying to mimic the structure and the rhythm of it and everything. Maybe it's like, trying to connect to a bell or something like that, which is sort of cool. But I don't know exactly what the message is there. I think it's more of a formal poem. So I agree with you on that one. I wouldn't worry too much about not getting the message of that poem. In terms of understanding what a poem is about, the way that you want to start, like we talked about in class, is just with noticing something, anything that sticks out to you. The way I often try to do this is by looking for repetition at the beginning, or any key words that you think are going to be important. For instance, when we read Kitchenette Building, that word dream sticks out immediately. It's capitalized, it has quotation marks, especially since we were reading Harlem and we know we're talking about the civil rights movement. I think the word dream, we know that's going to be important, right? So then the question becomes, well, what's going on with this dream here? So you want to start just by noticing things. Once you do that, everything else becomes much easier. And then once you notice something, you want to start thinking about, well, why would they do this? And I don't like phrasing it that way. I think the better way to phrase it is probably, what effect does it have on the reader that the poem did this thing? And then from there, you usually could start coming up with more like arguments. Oh, well, they were trying to do this. They were trying to say this. They were trying to give voice to the black nationalist movement. They were trying to criticize some aspect of the civil rights movement. Yeah, I think that's how I would start going about trying to understand really any poem, but obviously our poems as well. I also really like the last part of this question, where this person is asking, what helps you most when you're analyzing a poem? So I think having an open mind, starting out, not expecting that you're just going to read it once and be like, oh, I get this totally. I think coming into it knowing that poems are going to be kind of abstract, kind of weird, that you might have to read it a couple of times. I think first having that attitude is really important. Then noticing things like I was just talking about, repetition, that sort of stuff. From there, like we did in class, in our last class before we moved online, we read a poem and we were asking, does the poem think something is good or does it think it's bad? That I think is really important with poetry. Finding out what parts of the poem, like what is the poem trying to show you in a positive light and what is the poem trying to show you in a negative light. I think going there, we can start trying to figure out what the poem's trying to tell us. Like the video I did about Harlem, when I kind of went through line by line and we said, well, this sounds bad, festering like a sore sounds bad, stinking like rotten meat, like that sounds bad. So I think doing that as well, kind of playing that game of like, is this good, is it bad? Or like the one we did in class, when I asked you, the line was like, the fox ran out of his hole, is that a good thing or a bad thing? And then based on that, we could kind of move along with what we think the poem was trying to show us, what message that we thought it was sending. It's a good question there. Moving on now to our third question. This one reads, I have been having trouble with what am I supposed to be doing with the actual poem. I chose Harlem in topic 2, then they have the second topic from the assignment sheet here. What do all of the poems say about race and belonging in America? What are the challenges, consequences, and possibilities for the future of living in a country with such a long history of racial violence and intolerance? So I've been stuck between giving a synopsis of the poem's metaphorical take and explaining what I think the answer to these questions are. Should I lean away from the poem and give my own take? I was thinking about doing both, I just don't really know how to go about this. So this is a really good question, and kind of a fundamental one for literary analysis. First of all, I would say you shouldn't just be giving your own answers to these questions. There is a place for your opinion in literary analysis essays, right? When we started talking about literary analysis, I told you that one of the things is having your argument, right? There's not one argument. I can't tell you the right answer. Nobody knows the absolute right answer. There's different interpretations, right? Not every interpretation is equal, however, and we do have evidence, like I've talked about before, where I do believe some arguments can be stronger or weaker. But you definitely don't want to be giving your own opinion just like about race generally. This just isn't that type of essay. That would be more of an argumentative essay or a sociological essay or a historical essay. This is still a literary analysis essay. Even though we're doing poetry now, we were doing short stories last time, they're both literary analysis essays. And that means that what you're doing is making an argument about what you think the story, or in this case the poem, is trying to tell us. You should be giving us your opinion, yes, but your opinion about what the poem is trying to say. That's really crucial, and you have to make sure that you have that to be successful with this essay. So don't lean away from the poem. Don't just give your opinion. Tell us what is the poem trying to say on this topic. In terms of the second topic about belonging, I want to say something about it because I think the first topic is maybe a little more straightforward, the one more about theories of revolution and what do they think needs to be done. With this topic, I was thinking more of like, what does it mean for these poems to be an African American living in America? What does it mean to try to belong? I think of also Mississippi Goddamn, where Nina Simone says, I don't belong here, I don't belong there. What are these poems trying to say about this phenomenon? Just to wrap on that question and reiterate one more time, you want to be giving us not a synopsis of the poem, not a summary of the poem, not your answers to these questions. You want to give us the poem's answers to these questions. And I would also want to say here, once again, that I put these questions on the assignment sheet to get you started thinking, but you should not just be directly responding to these questions. It's not a short answer. This isn't a short response like maybe you've done before when you just write a couple of paragraphs directly responding to the question. Not what I'm thinking here, just like for the last essay. You've got to have your own thesis. You've got to have your own clear, debatable thesis. And that's going to make this essay a lot easier and a lot more successful. Okay, let's turn to the next question now. This is a short one, a quick one. It says here, one question I have is, can we use the We Shall Overcome song as a source in our essay? So I think I have two ways of answering this question. Number one, you can definitely use that song in your essay, right? And I'll even count that as being satisfying the requirement that you use one of the poems from class. You can use that one, that can count for that. So if you wanted to have that be the main poem in your essay, or, kind of like I did our class for that day, if you wanted to look at We Shall Overcome and maybe one of the more black nationalist poems like It's Nation Time or Mississippi Goddamn, and kind of like show how one of them shows one strain of the civil rights movement, the other one shows another strain. Not the only two strains, but two important ones. That's definitely an option, so you can use that song in your essay. Can you use it as a source? No, it wouldn't be a source, right? When I say source, I mean outside source, not a poem. None of the poems count as outside sources, right? By outside source, I mean an essay, I mean an article, I mean a chapter from a book, whatever. I would really encourage you to use some of the essays that I posted. I think I posted more essays for this unit than I had for the last unit. We had that first one, Making Civil Rights Harder by Christopher Metris, an excellent essay, especially if you're talking about citizen, or if you want to talk about the idea of the long civil rights movement, which is something I think I commented in a lot of your papers. I noticed in a lot of papers, people were saying, they started off by saying, oh, the civil rights movement happened in the 1950s and ended in the 1960s. So I would try to challenge that, especially with what Metris says in that article, where he talks about the idea of a long civil rights movement, right? Of a civil rights movement that stretches back to the first slaves coming to America, includes the first slave revolts, things like Nat Turner that I mentioned in my notes from that includes slave revolts, goes all the way up through abolition, through the Civil War, through the abolition of slavery, continues into the Jim Crow era. From there, we move into the 20s, the 30s, and then we get to the more conventional civil rights era of the 50s and 60s and everything like that. And then it goes further than that, right? This idea of the long civil rights movement basically asks us to think about the civil rights movement as something that started back in the 1600s when the first slaves were brought to America, and that continues to this day. And we see it represented in things like police brutality, or Citizen is especially interested in cases like Trayvon Martin and stuff like that. So I would ask us to think about it that way, just kind of have a more, rigorous historical understanding of the movement based on that essay. And also, obviously, the Martin Luther King and the Malcolm X would be great sources here. And the one that I posted last week, the Black Arts Movement, like I think I already said in this video, but it's really excellent. You've got to read that essay. It's going to be a good source for you. It's going to help you make your essay longer and get this done. Man, I thought that answer was going to be short too. This video was going to be too long. I'll try to be quick here. Next question. This assignment is a little difficult for me because I feel like I don't really have a lot of ideas to write about. I keep trying to talk about things, but I have nothing to really say that's good. Staying on topic's a little hard. I definitely understand this. It can be hard, especially as, you know, students who maybe haven't written about literature a lot. This can all seem very confusing. It can be hard to find your own ideas or your own thesis, you know, when we have all these poems, all these readings, all these different ideas coming at us. So I definitely feel the pain here. I think the best advice I can give about trying to come up with some ideas or finding a thesis, finding something to write about. First of all, if there's any of these poems that you actually like or that you enjoyed, I would always try to start there. That's something I always did as a student, was just if there was a certain story or poem or book that I read for a course, I would try to find some way to write about that just because I thought, you know, it'd be more fun, it'd be more engaging. And usually if you're having any amount of fun writing about something, it's gonna come out as a better essay, as a more interesting and engaging essay. So that's what I would say first, is if there's any of these that you're especially interested in, or that you liked, try to see, again, if you notice some things about it, if some things stick out to you, and then from there, trying to think, well, how does this affect the reader that they did this? How do the decisions that the authors made try to send a message about one of these topics? Also, to try to help you come up with ideas, that's why I have the topics on the assignment sheets to try to kickstart you if you're not totally sure what you want to write about. So definitely read through my topics on the assignment sheet and see if any of them are interesting to you or make sense to you, or you think you could at least write a decent amount about them. I would take a look at that. And for me, the easiest way to move towards making an argument about these poems is to look at whichever of the poems that you want and just try to put them, I know I've said this, but try to put them into the context of the politics of the time period. Where do the poems fit in? Are they more on this side? Are they more on that side? Are they criticizing both sides? Something that we're always doing in literary analysis is kind of looking at the book or the poem or whatever the piece of art that we're looking at. It's almost, this sounds terrible, but it's almost like we're looking at the poem as an essay, right? What's the thesis of the poem? What's the thesis of this novel? What message are they trying to get across? It's kind of how we think about essays. I feel like that is kind of terrible. Like, it kind of ruins the experience of the art, making it into an essay. I don't know. But just to think about it that way, what are they trying to tell us about this? And in the context of the time period, I think we can get a lot more solid answers to that question. Also, if you have any ideas about how the form might contribute to the message of the poem, that can always be interesting stuff, and there can be a lot of things to say about that. So if there's any way that you think the way the poem is written connects to what it's trying to tell you, that's another great way to get our ideas flowing and kind of expand on what we have. Moving right along to our next question here. It reads, I think that this assignment is hard for me. I've never been good at writing assignments when I have to read and then write about what I read. When it comes to me thinking of a topic and writing, like, that is what I succeed with more, especially when it comes to poetry. I don't really have any questions about the essay. I think it'll be okay once I put my mind to it. It just makes it a little harder with the fact now that all my classes are online. My normally lecture-based classes have now turned into writing-only papers. So just last week, I had to write 5 5-page papers, and I know it's college, it's just a lot to get done for every class without having that vital class time. This is a great point. I'm really glad that this came up. Just the difficulty of doing these online classes. I know it's difficult for you. It's very difficult for me. Making these videos takes me a lot longer than that it would take me to just give the lectures in class. So I wish I could do that. Maybe I should also say a little bit about why I'm doing things the way that I'm doing it. I know maybe some of you are doing like live chat streams or Zoom or whatever for your classes. I don't know, maybe some professors are doing that. I thought about it. I considered it. I kind of thought it would be unfair. I didn't think it would be fair to you guys. I really didn't, because I'm sure that some of you have these essential jobs. I know I have a number of students that I know work at grocery stores who I can't even imagine what you're having to go through with, I'm sure you're working extended hours and basically risking your life and the life of your families. And that is fucking crazy, you know? So I didn't think it was fair to expect you all to be around Monday 2 p.m. To be in a live video chat. So I thought that this would work better. And I know it sucks. I know I'm not very good at this. I was saying before that me in class versus me on video, it's kind of like when there's a stand-up comedian who's funny, but then they try to make a movie and it's just god awful. I think that is very much me. I know I'm not great on these videos. I know they're definitely not as much fun as our normal class. I miss you guys. I do. It sounds stupid and corny, but I really miss the interaction. I miss being able to ask you questions, get your answers, and bounce off it. It's really, you know, what I consider to be my greatest skill as a teacher is that back and forth. I never planned on teaching an online class. I'm sure a lot of you never planned on taking one because there's so much lost, and you know, we're all doing the best that we can. I guess is what we can say here. I hope that you're getting something out of our discussions on Canvas. I hope that you're going back and reading them after you post. I hope you're reading what your classmates are saying. I hope you're reading what I'm saying, because that's really the closest I think we can get right now to approximating that discussion that we normally have in class. In terms of assignments, it's insane to me that a professor would be giving you five-page papers to write. That's just absurd. Like, this is your writing class, so I don't know what class that is where they're doing that to you. But I heavily disagree with that. I don't think it's right. I can at least say from my point of view, you know, that I'm very mindful of what we're all going through. I'm going to be very open to working with you guys in terms of submitting things late or you know, with the grades at the end. If you're worried about your grade right now, let me just say, don't be. As long as I can see that you're making an effort, that you're handing things in, we'll figure it out, okay? So my thing for you right now would just be do your best, hand your stuff in, and we'll figure this out. And honestly, like, I think other professors are going to be that way, you know? I'm never really sure how different I am from other professors. But I really do think this semester, as long as you stick with it and it's clear to your professors that you're trying, I think that they're going to be willing to work with you. So I know that all of you are going through a lot right now, and this isn't really what we want it to be. But I think it's going to work out. I think we're going to get through it. If I could just give you guys a couple pieces of advice for trying to get schoolwork done during this time period. Number one, lists. I think this is important anyway, and I do it anyway, and I know it's corny, but making a list when you wake up in the morning of just like all the shit that you need to do in that day is really helpful. Wait, do I have mine? Let me see if I can find mine. I'll show you guys mine. If you want to look here, you can see some of my things. Oh, it's probably backwards or something. But some of my things, like right here, it's like, oh, make this video, you know? And then over here, it was like, drink coffee, you know? And I crossed that one off. So that becomes really nice. So it seems stupid, but make a list when you wake up in the morning of the things that you need to get done that day. Not only your schoolwork, but also the other things, you know, going to the grocery store, whatever it is. Just to try to make sure you're on track, and then even if you don't finish all the things, you can at least see, okay, well, let me move this over to tomorrow. And I'll tell you what, crossing the things off your list becomes really excellent. So that's one thing I recommend. Another thing, schedules. Have a certain amount of time that you're going to do something for. Keep track of how much time you're spending doing things. You know, try to have a set time of certain days, like a day where you don't work or whatever. Okay, from 10 a.m. to noon, I'm going to do this. I'm going to study. I'm going to write this essay. Try to have time periods, schedules where you're going to try to get things done. But don't overwork yourself. Make sure you build breaks into that schedule, or you build in, you know, I'm going to work for an hour on my essay, but then I'm going to watch a movie for an hour and a half, and then I'll study, or, you know, make dinner, and then I'll study, whatever. So try to have schedules for yourself. Another big one, calendars. I'm not in class every, you know, we're not in class every week for me to tell you, oh, this is due next week. We have this coming up. This is due in 2 weeks. I'm going to try to do that as much as I can in the instructions that I've been posting and make sure that you're reading those as well. But you've got to kind of take this on yourself and have a calendar. I use a physical calendar. Maybe one on the phone works for you. But have a calendar. Have things marked off when they're due. Know when your stuff is due so that you can get everything done when you need to. And I know all of this is easier said than done, but you know, maybe just by doing a few of these things, we can just make sure that we do what we need to do this semester to, you know, keep moving forward with our degrees and all that and get to where we want to be once we're on the other side of this virus and everything. So I really appreciate that question, and I'm thinking about all of you. And you know, I'm here to work with you, and I really would like to get some more questions from everybody. Send me some emails. I'm here. I'm on my email every day at this point, more than I ever have been in the past. So you might be able to get responses a little more quickly than earlier in the semester. So send me some questions. I would like that. All right, last question here. Let's wrap this up. This one says, my only question that I have is, can we use our own opinion? Or can we say I? And can we use our own point of view from reading the poem that we chose? That was really the only thing that I have as a question for the essay. I picked It's Nation Time, and I'm basically describing different aspects of what the poem means, trying to get to 4 pages. Okay, so in terms of your own opinion, absolutely, right? I think I already said this before, but your opinion on what the poem is trying to tell us, right? Not your opinion just on race, or your opinion on revolution during the civil rights movement, or your opinion on Malcolm X. That's not what I'm looking for. I'm looking for the poem's opinion on Malcolm X, the poem's opinion on the top politics of the time period. What do the poems think we need to do to gain equality? So as long as it's grounded in the poems, your opinion about the poems is what you need. It's perfectly welcome. That's what's going to be your thesis, is your opinion about what the poem is trying to say. So as long as you're approaching it this way, I think you'll end up with a good arguable thesis, and that's going to make the rest of your paper a lot easier. And the second part of this question, where they say, I'm basically describing the different aspects of what the poem means, I would just go back to what I said at the top of this video, where we want to make sure that we're not just going line by line. This means this. This means this. Well, this one, it means this. We want to make sure that we're not doing that. We want to make sure that we have our one argument that is determining the rest of our paper. We want to make sure that every paragraph that we have relates back to that thesis. That you're not having a paragraph that's just telling us, here's what they meant in the second stanza. Well, how does that relate to the argument? What are they trying to say about politics? Are they criticizing Malcolm X? Are they criticizing Martin Luther King? Where do you think this poem fits on kind of the spectrum of thought during the civil rights movement? So again, thesis, most important thing. Don't just like decode or interpret the poem for me. Tell me, here's what the poem is trying to say on this topic. So that is all the questions that I have for you today. Keep them coming if you still have questions. And I would just reiterate to us, one, clear arguable thesis like I was just talking about. 2, evidence quotes from the poems, right? And when you're using quotes, make sure that you both introduce the quote, set it up, give us any context that we need to understand it, and then explain the quote. Tell us how the quote relates back to your thesis. The quotes are evidence, right? It's just like anything else. In science, you know, if you did a science experiment, right, that would be evidence of something. But if you don't explain it to us, we're not going to know what it's evidence of. So, really in any discipline, whenever you have evidence, the important thing is not the evidence itself. The important thing is how you explain the evidence to us and connect it to your argument. So make sure you're introducing quotes and explaining quotes. Paragraphs. I would really encourage you to make sure that each of your paragraphs relates back to that thesis. It's something I like to do is at the end of the paragraph, and you know, it doesn't have to be one sentence, not a closing sentence necessarily, but you want to make sure that when your reader finishes one of your paragraphs, they can immediately see how that paragraph goes back to your thesis. You don't have to restate your thesis, you know, you don't want it to sound repetitive, right? But you want the audience to be able, okay, what you don't want is the audience to read a paragraph and be like, I don't know how that fits into the thesis, or like, why are you telling me this? That's the worst case scenario. So you want to make sure that when the reader finishes that paragraph, they can see exactly how it fits into your argument, how it fits in with your other paragraphs, how it fits in with the thesis, most importantly. One last thing I want to talk about again here is conclusions. So I made some of these comments, and I think I talked about it a little bit in class before we went online, but I made some of these comments on people's short story essays. The conclusion. I know we've been told in the past that in the conclusion, you're supposed to summarize what you've said so far, right? And I think we've always had the feeling that, like, that's just stupid, you know? This essay's not that long. It's only 4 or 5 pages. Like, did you forget what happened? Did you read the essay? Why would I have to just summarize everything at the end? So I don't think that's the best way to go about a conclusion. And I think this is going to be good news because we all hate conclusions, right? Because you're like, I'm just repeating myself. I feel repetitive. So what I would suggest, instead of summarizing what you've said so far, something that you can try to do in a conclusion is give us more of a big picture take. What I mean by this is you want to tell us why this matters. You want to tell us why it's important. If you're thinking about your reader, right? If you're going to read something, if you're going to spend the time to read something, you need to know why it matters, why it's important. Like, why should I give a fuck, really? So I think the conclusion is a great place to address this. So what I would recommend is in the conclusion, kind of telling the reader, like, here's why it matters if my argument is correct. Here are the real world consequences, or here's how this could change things going forward. So if I spent my whole essay trying to tell you, it's nation time, like makes this argument about revolution or whatever, like why should I care about that? As a reader, how's that going to impact my life? How might that impact the way that I see the world, or the way that I understand, America, or the way I understand history, or whatever it is? You just want to be able to answer the reader's desire to know why any of this matters. Why does it matter if you're right about this? Why should I care if what you're saying about its nation time is correct? You want to try to address all these things in the conclusion to give us kind of like that bigger picture, and kind of leave the audience with that, right? It's your last chance to tell the audience what's important here. So tell them, here's how things could change. Here's how maybe you might think about things differently after seeing the message that this poem sends. So that's another thing that I would say for conclusions. And you also do want to reinforce your thesis, but you don't need to just repeat everything you've already said. So I hope that helps. And yeah, I think that's all that I have for you today. I'll be coming to you with more videos soon. So again, we have that poetry essay due on Wednesday. Make sure you get that in. And we also have that song assignment coming in next week. That's due next week. So send me any remaining questions that you have about that stuff. And I hope you all enjoy the rest of your day, and good luck on those essays.